Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, joined as always by Tom Orr. Tom, I don't know if you know this, it's winter now, and it's really winter today. And wherever people are, it's going to be cold. And so what better way to get through the cold than by listening to a podcast?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a little pro tip. If your kids are home on Wednesday, like mine will be, because school is closed because it is cold, throw some kind of like a webinar for whatever your profession is. You know, if you're an accountant, throw some kind of accounting webinar on your computer screen, throw headphones on and listen to this podcast. And then if anyone comes in, just say, oh, I'm doing a webinar. I'm learning about tax something. It doesn't matter if you're an accountant. No one listens to what you say because it's all boring. So, if you're an accountant, it's an accounting webinar. If you're a real estate agent, it's a real estate webinar. I really have to, it's for work. And then just sit there, and that can be going on your screen, and you can just be sitting at your computer listening to this podcast. But if you're listening to this podcast, you already figured that out, I guess. We have smart listeners.
Yeah. Did you ever follow were you ever working in an office back in the day when you would follow the March Madness? You could watch it on your computer, and there was a boss button on the browser, and you would click on it if your boss walked by, and it would just open a screen that looks like an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, I remember the boss button on that. I think there was one of those buttons on one of those like mid 90s computer games, because I'm pretty sure that like the computer lab in my high school, I remember playing some version of Brick Breaker kind of game, and there was you hit the B key and then like a spreadsheet thing came up. So yeah, that is I don't know, do they give like the Heisman Trophy or like MacArthur Genius Grants for stuff like that, because that would be something that would definitely deserve it.
Right there, yeah, exactly. That's up there with the guy who invented the life preserver. Something to save a life, the boss button. So props to those people, both of them. I don't want to say who is more influential, more important, who has saved more lives. That's not what the show is about. The show is about a little bit about that, but mostly it's Ohio State athletics. Tom, how did you think that Michigan basketball game went? Pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. We are definitely not recording that before this game started, so I will say that that's okay. If Ohio State lost, that's okay, because Michigan would probably trade 50 wins over Ohio State in basketball for one win over Ohio State in football. So, if that happened, then that's okay. Then they're 1/50th of the way to happiness. So that's okay. And if they lost, you got to chant just like football at your TV last night, which is fine too.
Exactly. And there's no shame in losing a basketball game to a basketball school. So, there is that. Getting back to football, and then probably sticking on football. We started last week's show with the offensive line, and I think we're going to start this week's show with the offensive line again, because that's how I have it in the rundown. There's still 4 guys, because a new person has entered the picture. There were 3 guys in terms of the recruiting class. 3 guys left in the picture, and that was Doug Nestor, Dewan Jones, and Enoch Vamahi. But this past week, Rutgers right guard Jonah Jackson entered the picture as a graduate transfer with 1 year of eligibility. And Tom, about a half hour before we started the show, I went back and watched all of Rutgers' snaps against Ohio State, and I was really impressed by what I saw from him. There were times where, it's 45-3, it's 52-3, and he's still like planting Teron Vincent into the ground and jumping on top of Haskell Garrett, and he held his own throughout the game against Draymond Jones and Robert Landers. So for me, he was better than anything Ohio State had last year, just based on this one game. I didn't watch a lot of Rutgers, and even when it was Ohio State and Rutgers, I didn't watch a lot of Rutgers, but I was impressed by him. He's got the attitude that I think Ohio State lacked last year, and that they could that they could definitely use this year. Could have used it last year. But where are you with these 4 guys? You got Nestor down to Ohio State, Virginia Tech, maybe Penn State as well. Jones released his top 5 of OSU, USC, Indiana, Penn State, and Florida. the Mahi, maybe Ohio State, USC, Oklahoma, and Jackson is a Pennsylvania kid. So I'm thinking maybe Penn State. But if on the message board on Tuesday, I think somebody put an over-under of 2.5 on these guys of landing 2.5 over-under on that. And I'm going under on that. If I put the over-under on 1.5, where are you going and why?
If you give me an over-under of 1.5, I'll take the over. If it's 2.5, I'll probably take the under. I think 2 is the most likely number. I would say of all 4 of those guys, DeJuan Jones is probably the most likely. He seems like, he can list all the schools he wants to, but he chose not to visit Florida. So I think if you're looking at his final 5, Florida's probably not going to be it. And if you have a choice between Ohio State and Penn State and Indiana's probably not going to be it. And I mean, USC, maybe talk about USC a little later, but USC is kind of a mess now too. So it's really probably more of an Ohio State, Penn State thing. And he's an Indianapolis kid. And I don't know what Penn State offers you that's worth being 6 hours further from home that you can't get from Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State has that offensive line is a spot where there's an opportunity with Ohio State right now. Ohio State has shown itself to be the better program over the years, and you're 6 hours closer to home. So I think he's probably the most likely of those 4 to come. And then second, I guess I'm going to go with Jonah Jackson, second most likely, the grad transfer. Again, kind of same basic thinking. There's an opportunity to play there on the offensive line this year. He might be, in some ways, the most important of those 4, just because there's kind of an immediate need. There's not a ton of depth there, and they really do need an extra experienced body there. Third, I'll go with Doug Nestor, third most likely, just because he has been committed to Ohio State since the summer of 2017, and he is still technically committed to Ohio State, but we talked about this with Zach Harrison, and it ended up working out for Ohio State, that it just seemed like Ohio State is the easy answer. So if you haven't committed to Ohio State yet, there's probably a reason you haven't committed to Ohio State yet, and you're probably not going to end up with Ohio State for that reason. Now, Ohio State ended up winning that Zach Harrison recruiting battle, but that took a 62-39 win over the team that was probably in front for his services, and then a coaching change to a head coach that he, I think, likes a lot in Ryan Day. So there was some kind of major stuff that changed there. With Doug Nestor, I mean, keeping Greg Studwara there as an offensive line coach, I think probably helps. They have, I think, made him a priority, but he's been to Ohio State since Ryan Day took over and hasn't completely locked in yet that this is definitely where he wants to be. So I kind of get the sense he's looking around. And then Vimahi, I mean, maybe, sure, I don't know. Vimahi's kind of a unique situation because he is coming to play 1 year as a freshman, and then he's leaving 2 years for a mission trip. And that makes him, in some ways, the least impactful of these 4 guys, even though I don't remember if he's one spot higher rated or lower rated than Doug Nestor. They're both very highly rated players, right around the top 100 players, regardless position in the country. But Ohio State's critical need is like the 2020, 2021 seasons. They need the depth there, and that's when he's gone. And when guys go on mission trips, sometimes they end up transferring and not coming back to the school that they spent their first season at. So, if he comes for 1 year, he's probably not starting as a true freshman, and he's gone for 2 years, assuming that he sticks with that plan. That maybe makes him less of a priority in some ways than some of the other guys, even though he is an immensely talented guy if you watch his film, and he will be a good player at the next level, but that mission trip kind of complicates things.
Yeah, because he's maybe like 270, 275, so he's not going to come in 2019 and play. And so he's going to redshirt, and then he'll be on his mission trip for 2 years. And he won't necessarily be doing a lot of football training on that mission trip. So when he comes back in 2022, he's probably going to have to spend that year getting to be built into the football player that his team will need. So now you're talking 2023 before you can really get anything out of him. And like you said, that's not really where the need is now. Sure, you can get him, and it's almost like drafting in the NBA. You draft a European player and you stash him in Europe for a few years, and when he comes back, now you've got something. And that's kind of what he is. And there's a place for that, for an older veteran guy who has seen a lot and now is going to be like say a redshirt sophomore in 2023 and has seen a lot of the world or a portion of it and just had more life experience than a lot of guys and brings something to your offensive line and to your team. But yeah, I think he's the fourth priority for sure. Jonah Jackson, I think, could come in and start. Rarely does a guy do that at Ohio State. We see a lot of transfers, and remember in 2014 when the center came over from Alabama, and it was, he's going to start, and he didn't, and he wasn't healthy, and you can't put too much stock in these transfers. But we're talking about an honorable mention All Big Ten guy who would have probably been better than that if people would have seen him or watched him more or knew who he was, or if he had a name, or if there weren't so many 3 and outs. I'm wondering, like, what kind of wind does he have? Can he stay, can he stay in shape? Because it's, 3 plays and then you go to the sideline, and then, it's 5 plays, you go to the sideline. You wonder, can he hold up on with the hyper tempo that Ohio State can run? I've seen some people say that, a couple Buckeye fans, like, we don't want him because he's ditching his team. And, everybody else is like, well, that's pretty ridiculous, because I can't really blame somebody for spending 4 years at Rutgers, graduating, getting a degree, doing all of this, fighting, with Ohio State when it's 52-3, like it's still 0-0. And then he's like, what, I'd really like to go somewhere and win some games and experience that and experience a bowl game. I can't fault anybody for that, Tom.
I think, frankly, he's showing a lot better judgment than you did voluntarily watching Rutgers football in January. I mean, if we're going to question anyone's judgment here and character here, I think we should start with you.
Yeah.
But yeah,
you're right.
He seems like he was honorable mention all Big Ten last year. Ohio State has seen him up close. If they are offering him, and they have offered him, he's planning on taking a visit to Ohio State. If they're offering him, this is in many ways a more sure thing than most high school players, because high school players, you are watching someone take a jump from one level to another. There's questions about how they're going to develop. There's questions about how their bodies will change over time. This is someone who is going into, will be a college senior. You have a full year of tape of him playing in the Big Ten. How is he going to stand up against top level Big Ten defensive tackles? You have that answer. You have seen it on film. So that is, he is, I think, maybe in many ways the most important of those 4. The guy, I had to look this up because you brought up the guy who transferred from Alabama to Ohio State a few years ago, and I went, oh yeah, what was his name? It was Chad Lindsey. So and so there are no guarantees, as Chad Lindsey has shown, but that would certainly be a big help. It's very much like adding a 4th quarterback, like adding Chris Chugginoff last year. When he came in, I think the idea was that from a lot of fans was, well, if he plays, that's not good. If he's playing meaningful snaps, that's not good, which, yep, that's true, but you'd rather have him than someone else who might be below him or have to play a walk-on, something like that. You would rather have Jonah Jackson, who is, again, honorable mention All Big Ten, which is not, that is not like anything that would really raise your eyebrows at Ohio State. Oh, you were an honorable mention All Big Ten. But that means you can play at this level, and you would rather have someone who has established that you can play at this level rather than having to throw a true freshman in there, rather than having, if they got down because of injuries to having to throw Jonah Jackson or Harry Miller into the middle of the line, Harry Miller, as a true freshman, is going to be great at some point. But as a true freshman, that is a very tough place to get thrown into the game. And for a team like Ohio State that has the goals that Ohio State has, you don't want to be, putting a big question mark in there and kind of crossing your fingers and hoping it works out.
Yeah, a year ago, Matthew Jones was Harry Miller, the highly touted center who could come in and maybe play anywhere on the interior of the offensive line. You mentioned quarterbacks, so let's jump to that. And something in the last week was Texas A&M quarterback Nick Starkel, a redshirt sophomore, announced that he was transferring. And it was also reported that he was looking at Ohio State. You and I have talked in the past about, what Ohio State needs. The perfect guy would be somebody who would transfer with 2 years of eligibility. And that's what Starkel has. But even more than that, he has experience. He was a starter as a redshirt freshman, threw for almost 1,800 yards in 2017, and then got beat out in 2018. Only, he was 15 of 22 in 5 games for 169 yards. And obviously he was bypassed on a depth chart, so he wants to transfer. But even though Ohio State is losing Dwayne Haskins, it would seem odd to want to transfer to Ohio State. I guess for a guy like Starkel who wants to play, but then again, he has more experience than either Matthew Baldwin or Justin Fields. And is this where Ryan Day gets involved and not necessarily becomes the snake oil salesman, but tells Nick Starkel that, yeah, there's a chance definitely for you to start and play, just as there is for Justin Fields and just as there is for Matthew Baldwin. But, Tom, there's a danger in bringing in a guy who wants to play who then doesn't play, because you might already have that with Justin Fields or Matthew Baldwin. So now you don't want to bring in 2 disgruntled guys, but also you want to make that room as talented as possible, and maybe Starkel's the guy who could do that. For me, even though Ohio State loses Tate Martell, this is still a fascinating quarterback situation and quarterback group for Ohio State. And if they had Starkel, a guy who wants to play, it's just going to get more confusing, interesting, and maybe even combative.
Yeah, combative's an interesting word, because that has been always a room where it has been very friendly, and they've been generally pretty supportive of each other, and they all have funny nicknames for each other, and it's a pretty, they all want to play, but they're all in this together. And I think that starting with some of the Tate Martell comments and tweets and back in December, you kind of got the vibe that, this might not be how this goes in 2019. And, now Martell is gone, so some of that is gone with him, I think. But you have to be careful, because you don't necessarily want to bring that back, because you don't want division in the locker room. I mean, there have been Ohio State teams in the past that have been divided on quarterback, along the lines of quarterbacks. And that happened to some of the mid-90s, late 90s, Stanley Jackson, Joe Germain teams, where there was a little bit of a division in the locker room. You talk to guys who were on those teams, and there was the Stanley Jackson camp and there was the Joe Germain camp, and that can cause some friction in the locker room. And you want everyone kind of pulling the same direction. So that's something you got to be a little concerned about. But it is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch this play out, because they are really trying to kind of thread the eye of a needle with this, where it's like, you want someone who's good, you want someone who's good enough, who can play at the Ohio State level. You want someone who is competitive and wants to play, but you also want someone who's okay with not playing if someone else beats him out and isn't going to be a malcontent in the locker room. And it
doesn't exist.
The Venn diagram of all of those different traits, like the overlap is like this one perfect guy who I don't know who he is, but
Keandre Jones.
Yeah, if he's out there, Mark Pantoni is looking for him right now.
One of the guys that may be more of a fit in that there'd be maybe more reason he would be okay with sitting. I think we've talked in the past, you and I, about Gunnar Hoke, at Kentucky who is transferring, a Dublin kid who is also going to be a graduating redshirt sophomore. I believe he graduates in June. And here's a guy who has played just a little bit at Kentucky, 5 games this past year as a redshirt freshman, I believe. He was a legitimate 3-star recruit back in the day, if I recall. Just looking here at his 24/7, the number 40 pro style quarterback. But he might be more along the lines of a fit here for Ohio State rather than Starkel, who wants to play. And I'm sure Gunnar Hoke wants to play, obviously. He had offers from Kentucky, Cincinnati, Buffalo, Bowling Green. Probably not that different from Chris Chugunov's offer list. But a guy who, a hometown kid, might be more willing to not necessarily get the minutes because he's playing at a place where you would assume he grew up wanting to play, and this would be an opportunity to live that out. And again, I think it might just be a better, I don't know, to say cultural fit. I don't know that that's right. Maybe a more peaceful fit. He's one of the guys I think maybe his name might start popping up a little bit more.
Yeah, he is, of all the names that I've seen, that I've thought about, that I've kind of looked at and researched, he's, I think, the one that makes the most sense. Now, it's worth noting he graduates this spring. His name is not in the transfer portal yet. So if you're wondering why I haven't written about him, that's why, because he's not technically on the market yet. So he's gonna go through spring ball there, see how things work, and see how things are looking at the end of spring ball, and then make a decision at that point. And if he does enter the transfer portal, I would think if Ohio State is receptive to him, he's gonna probably give Ohio State a pretty good look. He camped at Ohio State during high school. He's from Dublin Kaufman High School, so he's a local kid. He is the nephew of former Ohio State assistant coach Fred Pugich, the cousin of former Ohio State linebacker Freddie Pugich. So he's got Ohio State bloodlines. His family are Ohio State fans. So, and he wanted to be a Buckeye, I think, in high school. Camped at Friday Night Lights, didn't end up getting an offer, and ended up going to Kentucky. He was his redshirt sophomore season last fall. He was 13 for 26 in very sporadic play. Didn't get a lot of chances. He may be kind of a square peg round hole thing with the offense they're trying to run there. So he may just not be a great fit with Kentucky. So if he's looking to transfer, if Ohio State wants him, I would say they would have a pretty decent chance of getting him. And he is, of all the people, maybe the best fit of anyone. I mean, I looked at a whole bunch of other people, and we can go through some other possibilities for that quarterback position if you want. But yeah, Hoke, if he does decide to transfer, Ohio State would make a lot of sense for him, and he might make a lot of sense for Ohio State as a 2-year guy.
Right, and another reason we're talking about him is because he has the same class eligibility as Kentucky starter Terry Wilson, who basically took over the position this year, threw for 1,900 yards, rushed for another 500, and is really the present and the future of the position for Kentucky. They like him, and the writing is on the wall there. The Oklahoma State kid, the Keandre Woodtee,
yes,
is another interesting guy. Obviously, he's familiar with Mike Yurcich, and there's as I said, a familiarity there where both guys know each other. Coach knows the player, player knows the coach, and even more than that is, Ryan Day would be able to get a feel for the fit just from talking to Yurcich about it, and vice versa. And maybe all of these guys are maybes, and I think the two we've talked about should be the two main guys, the most likely guys. Really, I don't, some of the other guys you mentioned that you wrote about last week, like Ross Bowers, I think he's already, he wants to play from Cal. He wants to go and play somewhere else. And that's the problem with a lot of these guys. And that's what we've said. It's hard to find this fit just because it's a unique ask of somebody. come in and don't expect to play, but you can't just be some schlub. You're still going to have to work. We still need you to, maybe you might be our scout team quarterback now. And that's not always, that's rarely fun, going against the number one defense, running an offense that you're not familiar with. You learn it that week, and then you go out and run it against the Ohio State defense and you get destroyed. And next week you get to learn a new offense and run that and get destroyed. And Ohio State takes great pride in the scout team. So they're, Urban Meyer would talk those guys up all the time. And I'm assuming that's going to continue under Ryan Day. But we're talking about guys who have come from being the backup or the starter to now going to the scout team. And it's hard to get your hopes up for something special there.
Yeah, it's a difficult, like we said, it's a difficult thing to convince someone. It takes a special kind of person with a certain kind of goals to be willing to do that. There were a number of people when I started writing about quarterback transfer possibilities that went, oh, how about this guy? How about this guy? And a whole lot of them are like, well, it's an Ohio kid, so maybe. And the answer on those has generally been no. Brett Keane was someone who was from, I think it was Lakewood St. Ed, somewhere up near Cleveland. He went to South Florida. He was a backup there for a few years. He is transferring to Charlotte because he wants to be a starter. And that's a completely reasonable thing to do. If you want to be a starter, it's the Joe Burrow thing from last year. He wants to be the starting quarterback somewhere. And he has, I don't know a lot about the Charlotte 49ers roster, but I can say with great certainty that he has a better chance of being the starting quarterback for the Charlotte 49ers in 2019 than he does the Ohio State Buckeyes. So if that's your goal, in my opinion, if that's your goal, then that's the move. And you can't fault anyone for that, just like you couldn't really fault Joe Burrow for making the move to Louisiana State last year. Quentin Maxwell, who was someone from Ohio University, I reached out to him. He said Ohio State was not really on his mind. It doesn't look like that was the direction he's going because, again, he was a backup behind Nathan Rourke at Ohio University last year. He wants to play, so he's going to go to a school where he has a chance to be a starter. Ohio State is probably not that kind of spot. Tuesday night, just before we started recording, Keandre Woodtee, who was the quarterback from Oklahoma State, he had been very, very quiet about his transfer, why he was transferring. And I had reached out to him and had not heard anything back from him about, would he be interested in reuniting with Yurcich at Ohio State? He's a Louisiana kid. And Tuesday night, he tweeted out kind of a, thanks for everything Oklahoma State thing and said that it was related to an illness in his family. So my guess would be he would probably be going somewhere back towards home in Louisiana. So, a Louisiana Tech or Louisiana Monroe or somewhere like that would be.
Columbus is closer.
It is closer. I'm not sure you've looked at a map recently, but
it's closer east.
They are. Yes, it's closer east. If he is only looking at longitude, then I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, as long as this is a longitude-based decision and not playing time or latitude, true proximity, then maybe there's a chance. But
as we said, it's a difficult ask.
Yes. So this is kind of how this has gone. You can go through that transfer portal list, you can go through the grad transfer tracker and kind of look at names and go, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, maybe. But a lot of the ones that have, kind of made sense have ended up not working out or not being a good fit for one reason or another because of what the player's looking for. And there are not going to be that many guys who are looking for a chance to be part of a big program and maybe get drilled a whole bunch on the scout team if that means a chance to play in or, to go to the Rose Bowl or to win the Big Ten championship or go to the college football playoff next year.
And the scout team, I think that's one thing that people maybe are overlooking. Ohio State scout team quarterback Corey Curtis has also entered the portal and has transferred. So that's an open position as well, and that's something they need to fill. And they liked Corey and what he did for them, and so they'll need to fill that. And you also have to fill he was the drop back scout team. You need to fill the read option guy, and sometimes that was Jalen Gill last year to give you an idea of his versatility. So that's another position they need to fill. One guy that they lost, and you mentioned the transfer portal, so we can move on to Keandre Jones, linebacker, has transferred to Maryland. I think we talked last week that that would be his most likely destination given that's where he's from. He was committed there at one time, and Mike Locksley is now there as the head coach. And he's a guy who is very, Maryland players need to stay home, and is very convincing. And I think what Chase Young was asked at the bowl game, like if Mike Locksley was at Maryland when you were a recruit, would you have gone to Maryland? And I think he said, it would have been very difficult to say no. You wonder if Dwayne Haskins at the time was committed to Randy Edsall. So was Keandre Jones at Maryland, which is strange that anybody could commit to Randy Edsall. But they did it. But if it was Locksley, would those guys have been Terrapins? And so with the Jones thing, we had a couple of people asking, did the Ohio State coaches miss on him as a recruit, or did they do him a disservice by not playing him? And we got to see just a little bit of him in the spring, not really much, but he was with the ones in the spring. And so he had an opportunity to win a job. He just didn't do it. And my recollection is that he started out as the number one will, and Pete Werner and Malik Harrison were the Sams. And then Werner got moved to Will, and he wasn't very accustomed to Will. So, late in spring, Keandre Jones stayed ahead of him because it was a new position for Werner. So I believe Jones left the spring as the number one Will, but then not too far into fall camp, Malik Harrison went to Will, Pete Werner went to Sam, and Keandre Jones went to special teams. So I would say that he lost his job. He didn't keep it, he didn't keep his job. But then if he's competing against Malik Harrison, he probably wouldn't keep his job. But then you would also think that he's a guy, I've talked to him in the past, where he said he can play all three positions. And this was back when the Sam was, Chris Worley, and he believed that he could play all three positions. So you would think that he could play it as well as Pete Werner, if not better. But like what I tell people is he got beat out. I mean, he had his opportunity. And I know people think that you can't convince some people that Pete Werner and Tuff Borland didn't beat out the guys, to be able to play. They think it was just favoritism. And there is some favoritism, but you also need results. And what I'm assuming, I believe that Keandre Jones didn't provide the results in practice because, Tom, that's how depth charts are made.
Right. And this is not the easiest thing to guess at for us because we did not have any access to practice during fall camp. And during spring ball, I'm trying to remember, I think we watched like 45 minutes or an hour, maybe twice during spring ball in addition to the spring game. I mean, we're getting little bits and pieces. And even during those hours, it's not like we're just watching the linebackers. We're watching, we're making a point to watch wide receiver drills so we can tell you how Jalen Harris is doing, or we're watching the offensive line drills to see who the starting center is going to be, and you always wanted to know about Tate Martell, so we spent time looking at Tate Martell too. So
what a waste of time.
It's like Cousin Eddie. I just wish I had all that money back that I gave that TV preacher. Just wish I had all that time back I gave Tate Martell. So, I mean, we got to watch 2 hours, but it wasn't 2 hours of just watching linebackers or specifically just watching Keandre Jones. So, I mean, it's hard for us to make a definitive statement about whether he deserved to be the starter last year or not. The coaching staff had a lot more information than we did and decided that he did not. And the fact that he was running with the ones is kind of telling. I think that last summer, when we were doing linebacker previews and guessing at people, I'm pretty sure I had him at the will projected as the starter last summer. And then at some point that stopped being the case. So you can question whether Bill Davis and or Greg Schiano and or Alex Grinch, whoever was kind of making that decision together, made the right decision, but they gave him a shot. This was not a case of someone who was just buried on the bench and didn't get a chance to start. He got his chance to play, and for whatever reason was found lacking and found to not be playing up to the standard of the starter. Now, you look at the safety position last year, and you can decide whether you think that the coaches always make the right decision and that they are completely flawless in their evaluation, and I don't think that's probably the case, but he at least was given a chance to play and didn't end up earning that spot. He was not clearly better enough than Pete Werner or Malik Harrison or Tuff Borland to earn one of those starting spots. So that is a position where you don't ever want to see seniors leaving, because you want that veteran depth, you want that veteran presence in the locker room. But that's a spot where they have a lot of other talented linebackers. He was a top 100 player, 4-star player, but they've got a lot of 4-star linebackers in that room. So losing one is not going to be a deal breaker for the 2019 season, I don't think.
Yeah, and the Brendan White situation is where my argument always falls apart, because there's always a Brendan White every year. That why wasn't he playing? I do believe that players, I guess, shine at their elevation, their preparedness, or their level of ready probably mirrors that opportunity. Like, there's a pretty good chance that Brendan White was not ready until that opportunity. You know what I'm saying? Like, he got better got good enough just in time. But then you look at the way the safeties played before him, and you're like, he couldn't have been any worse. He had to be more ready than those guys. So yeah, I don't like to talk about the whole Brendan White situation when I'm trying to say, like, yeah, everybody was better than Keandre Jones. So when you bring up Brendan White, it makes me look bad. So we need to steer clear of that and just bring up the arguments to help me here. I always want
Alex Grinch and I would both like to apologize.
Because I wanted to see him out there, because he's a versatile guy, and he's, always good to talk to the few times we got to talk to him, and he came with a lot of promise, and I think Rivals even had him a 5-star guy. But from my vantage point, which was, like you said, 2 hours of practice, he had an opportunity and he got beaten out. And now, does that make him a miss as a recruit? No, that could still make the coaches very wrong. And, Tom, imagine when he has 150 tackles this year at Maryland, you're going to have some very upset Buckeye fans.
That is definitely a possibility, that he turns into a second team all Big Ten linebacker at Maryland and plays, has 18 tackles against Ohio State, and the reaction from Ohio State fans who are just predisposed to love everything about the linebacker unit and its coaching already, I'm sure will only continue to will welcome that performance with a hail and hearty handshake. I would not be surprised at all if that's how this plays out, because he's a talented player. He was an impact player on special teams. You saw him block that punt against Nebraska last year, for example. And he's an impressive guy in the locker room. Like, it would not completely floor me if he transferred in and was a captain at Maryland this fall. Yeah. That would not surprise me at all, because I think there was a decent chance he would have been a captain at Ohio State this year. So, he is, I think, at this point, one of those people that Ohio State fans should just kind of wish the best, and good luck in your new home. And you are never, I think, going to know whether he was truly one of the 3 best linebackers in 2018 or not, because there's just a lot of variables, and another year of experience for him and the opportunity to play in a different system at Maryland. It's not going to be quite as clean a comparison as I'm sure some people would want to make it.
Yeah, and I think everybody was in the same boat as Keandre Jones last year when we're talking about was he underutilized, undercoached, all of that. I think they all were, and you don't know how that would translate to this year for Keandre Jones. Maybe good, maybe not. But I go back to somebody else that was mentioned on the board on Tuesday, which was John Kerr, who, if you guys remember way back to the early 2000s, like 2003, 2004, somewhere around there, John Kerr was, I believe, from Cleveland St. Ignatius, linebacker, went to Indiana, had about 115 tackles as a freshman, was, a freshman All-American, and eventually transferred to Ohio State for 2 years and maybe notched 15 or 16 tackles over that time. So, yeah, you can maybe go shine in another defense, but that's because the opportunity is there and the talent to get into that depth chart isn't as high. And so, you're on the field a lot as a defender at Indiana. There's a lot of tackles to make. I'm going to assume the situation will be the same at Maryland this year. There are a lot of tackles to make, and if you are a starting linebacker, you're going to make a lot of them. That doesn't mean he would have done the same thing at Ohio State. Tom, how often do fans even concern themselves with linebackers at Maryland or a linebacker at Rutgers and think, he would be doing, Ohio State is missing out by not having that guy. That's not really a thought process, but it will be this year. And I'm maybe 215 tackles, something like that, something to really get the juices flowing and get the ire up, because that's always an interesting topic. But like you said, I'm with you. There's so many linebackers, and for me, you have to find a way to get Baron Browning on the field. And if you have to clear out a couple of guys to make sure that happens, you have to find out and know for sure that he can't play at Ohio State. He is entering his junior season. I don't want to say these first 2 years were wasted, but they didn't get their money's worth. And I don't mean money's worth in an SEC kind of way. I just meant all of these resources and all of this work to land arguably the nation's top linebacker recruit in 2017. And what you have to show for it right now is not that much. And that's not necessarily his fault. It might be more Ohio State's fault than his fault. But also, if he played better, he would get on the field more. I just think they have to make sure that he can't play here. And you give him an opportunity with his measurables and everything that you think he can do. Tom, I need to give him as much of a chance to show me before I'm like, well, you know what? I guess we need to get Pete Werner back in there, or we need to see what we've got in Dallas Gant. I don't know that he's going to be the middle linebacker again. I kind of see him at the Sam, if we're talking Malik Harrison at the Will and Tuff Borland or Taraji Mitchell at the Mike, and we're not doing the linebacker preview just yet. But for me, I think the Sam is probably the path of least resistance. Where are you on Barron and this whole thing?
He is definitely someone I would like to see on the field at some point, because you want to know. I mean, like you said, he has the measurables. A couple of years ago, Mike Mitchell had the measurables, and there was a whole lot of stuff Mike Mitchell didn't have, and then he went and transferred to Texas Tech, and he didn't play at Texas Tech either. So you kind of want to know, does this guy have it or not? Because what the way this could end up is a Dwayne Haskins situation where he played, he could start 1 year, and because of those measurables, if he has a good season, he could turn into a first-round NFL draft pick. That is not an outside the realm of possibility outcome for him the first year he's a starter. That's probably a 95th percentile outcome. That's not going to happen most of the times, but it's a possibility, and you kind of have to know what you have. And so I'm with you there that I would like to see him get a shot somewhere. It's not like the linebacking play has been so good at any of those positions that it's just like, oh, sorry, there's just no way to get him on the field. You want to have multi-year starters if you can. You want to have guys who are experienced. You got guys who can run, make the plays in space, cover the receivers or the backs out of the backfield. You want those guys out there and you want to give them a chance to contribute for as long as they can before they are potentially turning pro. Taraja Mitchell is kind of in that same boat. I really would like to see what Taraja Mitchell can do this year. And he did what he was supposed to do on special teams last year. That is typically the path to playing time. So, yeah, you want to stick Browning out at Sam and give Taraja Mitchell a chance at Mike, and maybe he can at least supplement Tough Borland in the middle, or maybe he can beat out Tough Borland in the middle. There's a lot of questions there, including how is Tough Borland going to look with another 6 months of rehab after his Achilles injury. There's a lot of stuff we don't know right now, but I would really like to see some of those younger guys get a chance just to know what you have.
And the coaches are convinced. They said last year that, and even the year before, Baron Browning is going to be special. So they seem to know. The other wrench in all of this is, are they going to go to a 4-2-5 type of defense, in which case now you're even more compacted. But I mean, there's enough guys that they should be able to make up for the loss of Keandre Jones. I wanted to talk about Terry McLaurin at the Senior Bowl, who what was one of the guys who stole the week based on his mainly just always being open in practice, and then was open all over again during the game. Paris Campbell turned the Senior Bowl down. I think it could have. I think it would have helped him, or maybe exposed him. I don't know. But it definitely helped it definitely helped Terry McLaurin. Johnny Dixon was going to be in the NFL Players Association game, but had the flu that week, so he couldn't. I think anytime you can get in front of that many eyes, it's something you need to do. More for McLaurin and Dixon. And we've mentioned last week and the week before, you wrote about it, Paris Campbell's name popping up in the first round based on what he did this year and based on what he's going to do at the combine. So maybe he's feeling pretty good about his situation and doesn't feel the need to be in the Senior Bowl. For McLaurin, though, I mean, it could not have gone better. And a year ago at this time, I didn't see him as an NFL receiver. And I don't know that I did, even going into the Senior Bowl week. And when you're a starter at Ohio State, you're going to go to the NFL. You're going to get paid in the NFL. However long that is going to be up to you. But you start at Ohio State, and then you're going to get a look in the NFL. And so by that measure, he was going to play in the NFL. But I didn't know that he was going to be an NFL receiver legitimately until this past week and everything he did and everything that everybody has said down there. John Gruden saying he's going to be in the league for a long, long time. Now, that may all be wrong, but this is something that those guys are thinking and believing right now. And he turned himself into somebody who, coming into the season, was going to be an undrafted free agent, to somebody now you're maybe second or third round. And who knows what that's going to be when he gets to the combine, because we've seen him. He was one of the top spark guys at the Nike at the opening back when he was in high school. So he's saying he's going to run a 4.35. He's going to do all of the other measurables as well. Just really impressed by what we saw from Terry this past week. And obviously, Tom, he owes it a lot to the work he's put in, but I'm wondering how much of that is also Brian Hartline finalizing Terry McLaurin as a wide receiver and the impact that he had on him all season long, and then they capped it really well in this past week.
There's no question that both Campbell and McLaurin in particular developed a ton during their time at Ohio State. And you go back to the first couple of years for both of those guys, it looked hopeless at times. I mean, just you looked at those guys back in 2015, and they were just completely invisible on the field. Just no hope. Seemed like these are guys who were just never going to pan out.
Yeah, they played and didn't catch the ball.
Yeah, it was. I remember Paris Campbell against Virginia Tech in 2015. I think having a ball that was like, oh man, if you can't catch that, like this is just not going to work for you. And to their credit, they stuck with it and they stayed and they fought and didn't just turn into contributors, but turned into team leaders, multiple time captains. And I mean, Paris Campbell just left with the single season receptions record and 1,000-yard receiving season, and was projected as a first round draft pick by Mel Kiper and second round a lot of places. And now McLaurin he was not on a lot of those early draft boards. After that Senior Bowl week, like he could be a third round pick, like not even a question. Because I thought, I'm kind of with you, where this year, if you'd asked me, like, what's he going to do as an NFL player, I would have said, I don't know, maybe like turn into kind of a Nate Ebner type special teams gunner specialist, and have a decent career that way. He is going to get a chance to take some snaps on offense too, all of a sudden. And the fact that he's probably also going to be a special teams ace will only help him have a long career and stick in the league for quite a while. But he earned himself some money this week. That is for sure.
Brian Hartline also earned himself some money over this entire season, and we're seeing that in the number of 2020 wide receivers who are seriously looking at Ohio State. And another of them came out this past week, Johnny Wilson, the number 2 receiver, 6'5", 215 out of Calabasas, California, came out and put Ohio State in his top 5. And looking at the 24/7 composite, you've got Julian Fleming at 1, who's from Pennsylvania, who has been to Ohio State at least 3 times. You've got Johnny Wilson at 2. I don't know that he's been to Ohio State, but he will. You've got Demond Demas, who is committed to Texas A&M, but has been flirting in the past with Ohio State throughout last season. He's a Texas guy, probably just stays with Texas. You got Raheem Jarrett out of Washington, D.C., who I think we've mentioned before. If you want to see a prospect talk up a school and hide, either completely lie or hide none of his thoughts about his favorite school, then that's Raheem Jarrett tweeting about Ohio State. So those are the top 4 guys in the nation, and they've all looked seriously at Ohio State. Now the Buckeyes already have commits from G. Scott, who is, I think, the number 15, the number 15 receiver, and then Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is way, way down. I don't even know why they're bothering with this guy, the number 67 receiver in the nation. It's like, why? But maybe he'll be fine. Maybe if he can become another Terry McLaurin, perhaps, then I think they'll be happy. But it's been interesting to see just how quickly, obviously, the passing offense of Ryan Day and Dwayne Haskins' ability to spread the ball to the receivers catches receivers' eyes. But Brian Hartline, not just as a position coach, but as a recruiter, is, I would say, a future star, but I'd be lying because he's a present star. And we see he's involved with a lot of guys who aren't, beyond just his position. Like it appears that he's becoming one of Ohio State's go-to recruiters whenever they need somebody. And he's the guy that they put on first. And I wonder how much longer he's going to be at Ohio State before he has because the natural progression would be like offensive, receivers coach, offensive coordinator, or as Urban Meyer did, receivers coach, head coach of Bowling Green. But enjoy Brian Hartline while he's at Ohio State, right?
Yeah, he is someone who has a pretty bright future in the business. And if Urban Meyer had stuck around for 3 more years, you might have seen Brian Hartline taking that Ryan Day role and stepping in there. He is, if you can recruit and you've got already a reputation for developing players, which he certainly does. I mean, you look at that, and that Ohio State wide receiver room, guys are not just playing well there and putting up stats there, they're getting drafted out of there too. So that's going to be a good start for you. And then you can point to a pretty nice NFL career, a surprisingly long NFL career. That's only going to help you with recruiting. And all of a sudden you are a pretty attractive candidate for much bigger spots. So there's always the question of how the leap from one level to another will go, because I can think of some position coaches in the recent Ohio State past who have maybe not panned out particularly well at the coordinator level. And if you do that, then that can derail your career pretty quickly, and you can take a lateral move to be a position coach at Minnesota again, hypothetically speaking. So you never know when you're taking that leap. But with Heartline, it's been so far so good, and that you're right. I mean, that has paid off huge for Ohio State already with the receivers in this class, the ones that they have in, and then the ones that they're in on. Because, I mean, Fleming's from Pennsylvania, so it's like, okay, that kind of makes sense. Jarrett's from D.C., so that's within their normal recruiting area. But Johnny Wilson is a California kid, so that is not an area they typically have recruited all that much from. But because last year they brought in Chris Olave, who is a California kid who didn't just come in and play a little bit as a freshman, but came in as a true freshman and scored 2 touchdowns in the first half against Michigan. Like that is something that's going to make people stand up and take notice, because that was probably something that turned into a story out where Johnny Wilson's from. And then as a result of that, Ohio State played a game out where Johnny Wilson's from because they played in the Rose Bowl. So all this stuff kind of works together, and Brian Hertline certainly seems like he has it all working right now.
And G. Scott is from Washington, so that tells you how far they'll go and the reach. But the other thing to keep in mind is he's from Eastside Catholic in Sammamish, Washington, which is also the place where the number 1 overall recruit in 2021 plays. I believe he's a defensive end. So it's also good to get into that school and maybe create a 2-person pipeline in the future. We'll see. As you wrote on Tuesday about the possibilities of this 2020 class, we can always talk about right around now where like they could get all of these guys, these are all guys that are looking for them, it would be a great class. And it never happens that way. And it's not going to happen with these 4 receivers, but it gives you an idea of what's going on around the nation's top receivers and their view of Ohio State. And this is after 1 season of Ryan Day's like passing offense. We'll see what it looks like moving forward, but these are very good signs. And the 2021 receivers are also very aware of Ohio State. And I think as we go on, Ryan Day is going to be sending quarterbacks and receivers to the NFL on the regular, which just helps the recruiting all that much more. We're going to start doing some spring positional previews because we've got this 6 shows between now and the start of spring football. So this show, we're going to look at the special teams. We've got a few questions from listeners. We didn't ask for special teams questions initially, but a lot of the questions were special teams. So I thought, you know what? Let's go ahead and make this a special teams preview. Tom, I'm expecting, even though new special teams coordinator Taver Johnson is gone, the super coordinator Urban Meyer is gone, Ryan Day probably won't be as involved in the special teams because he's still going to want to be around his precious quarterbacks. So there's going to be some changes. I don't think there's going to be the amount of changes that people are thinking, because we've talked about Urban Meyer's plan to win and how special teams are so tied into that. And Urban Meyer is so good at winning, so why not borrow his plan to win and make it the Ryan Day plan to win? So when you've got, we can go over some of the questions here. One guy from Shane Falco, will Matt Barnes, the new special teams coordinator, bring an end to our urban-induced and never-fixed punt return adventures? Does anyone challenge KJ? I think that's just the nature of punt returning. Philly Brown has fumbled. It's not an easy thing to do to bat 1,000 when you're catching punts. Jalen Marshall was the most aggressive punt returner I've ever seen. And that's going to lend itself to sometimes having some boots and some muffs, but the staff loved the way that he kept the ball from bouncing past him. KJ Hill, DeMario McCall. I don't think that's an Urban Meyer thing, Tom. I think that's just a punt return thing.
Yeah, I think that's a punt return thing. And the problem is, if you have the Philly Brown, Jalen Marshall, hey, that guy's too aggressive, then people complain about that, and it becomes the Jalen Marshall punt return roller coaster that everyone hates watching every single time the ball goes up in the air. And if you get away from that, and you put a KJ Hill back there,
yep.
And it's like, oh, this is the safe guy. They're just, all they want to do is make sure they catch it, and the ball doesn't get past them, and just fair catch it and let the offense go do its thing. Just don't mess up. Don't turn the ball over. Then everyone complains, well, you've got all these playmakers. Why aren't you putting them out there? Why are you not? And, I mean, both positions have their merits, but there's just, until you have the completely safe guy who also is Rocket Ishmael but will never fumble, like that's like the quarterback recruiting that we just talked about. Like, sure, you would love to have all of those traits. It's actually not that easy to find one person that can do all of that stuff. So if you want to get DeMario McCall on the field on kick returns and punt returns, every once in a while a ball's going to hit him on the chest and Michigan's going to get the ball inside the 10-yard line. Like, that may just be a thing that happens every once in a while. CJ Saunders had, I think, a muff or two last year. Like, it does happen.
Well, and when you put two guys back there and they don't communicate very well, they have a tendency to run into each other, as we saw a couple of times last year. But if a guy is that perfect and catches everything and doesn't get tackled, he's probably going to be too valuable to put on special teams, because you're getting the ball to him 15 times on offense. And also he has returned 7 interceptions for touchdowns on defense. And he's probably just way too tired to even play special teams after being the best player at on offense and defense in the nation. See, I don't think that's just, I think people, in general, you see a guy that muffs the punt, you're thinking, oh, here we go again. But that's just the nature of the game. And, punting is also becoming so much more, it's not just kicking the ball anymore. It's kicking it on the point of the ball. It's kicking it on the side of the ball. It's running and then kicking to create some bounces, and you can kick it to create skids. And it's not as easy as it used to be of just catching this end over end oblong ball where you have a pretty good idea where things are going to go. And we're seeing backspin on punts now, and just all crazy kinds of things from, the Australians invading the game of football and making the punting one of the more entertaining aspects of the game, as opposed to the Europeans who have destroyed the NBA with their flopping, kind of like rabbits in Australia. They've just destroyed everything, and now it's an unwatchable sport, and we're all forced to watch football. So it's actually turned out okay. It's been a positive outcome. You mentioned DeMario. I see him at kick return. I still think it's going to be KJ and CJ Saunders at punt return, because, like you said, they are the safest two. And if your offense is all that, all you need to do is catch the ball and let the offense go the rest of the 70 yards. You don't need a guy to get you 20 yards to get you to the 50. You'll be able to get to the 50 in 2 plays. You just need a guy to catch the ball. So I don't see anything changing. I think what we saw with DeMario late in the season, that kickoff return at Maryland, was a game saver. I think he will have more of those this year. But every time we start, we have expectations for DeMario at this point. He starts out, he's involved, and then 9 games go by where he's kind of moved into the darkness. I don't expect that this season, but I also didn't expect it last season. But I'm thinking DeMario at kick return, maybe he's going to have somebody else there. Who knows? Will it be Master Teague blocking for him or something like that? I don't know, but I don't really see any changes from last year in terms of the return game. Do you?
The only other name that I would like to see out there in some form is Jalen Gill. Yes, Jalen Gill. Yes, I would like to see Jalen Gill out there somewhere. I almost don't care where. I think that if you have those 4 names, CJ Saunders, KJ Hill, Jalen Gill, and DeMario McCall, I think some combination of those 4 guys is going to take every meaningful kick return and punt return for the first month of the season. I would feel pretty confident about that. And, I don't know, maybe you work a Garrett Wilson in there at some point or something like that if he really develops, or Jamison Williams or someone like that if they develop. Or, Cameron Babb is someone we haven't really seen yet, but he's kind of an electric playmaker as well. They have, this is Ohio State. There is no shortage of guys you would be really intrigued to see running with the ball in the open field. But if you give me those 4 guys that I mentioned, I think there's a pretty good chance those are some combination of them is taking every meaningful return for the first part of the season.
And replacing Terry McLaurin at gunner will likely be, one of the gunners will be Chris Olave, who did it some last year. We'll see who else joins him. That's a critical position as well. And if you've followed Ohio State for the last 12 years, you should know how much it meant to Urban Meyer, because he had the best he ever saw was Devin Smith, and then it was Terry McLaurin, and we'll see if Chris Olave can live up to the best that Ryan Day has ever seen.
That's a smooth transition to Zadiah's question. At Zadiah asks, will Day have a policy like Urban's where you don't start until you play well on special teams?
That's not just an Urban Meyer thing either. I think that's a common thing among a lot of coaches. And I wrote about that a few days ago. Brian Hartline, I was talking to him about that, or maybe I was just listening to him talk about it at the Rose Bowl, where he said, if I can't trust you on special teams, why would I trust you on offense? So if we can't give you an assignment on special teams and you don't perform that well and you don't execute it, why would I think you could execute on offense? And that goes back to some of what we talked about with Brendan White in the past, where he had said he had issues with the playbook. He wasn't attacking special teams as he needed to. And so the coaches are, rightly saying, in my opinion, like, if we can't get you to go all out on special teams, why do you think we would trust you to go out and do something on defense, when, especially Brendan White being the last line of defense, if you can't do this little thing that we're asking, if you can't maintain your lane on special teams, why on earth do we think you would maintain your lane as the last line of defense for a defense that you're going to be put in a lot of sticky situations? And so, yeah, I don't think that's going anywhere. It may not be as militant under Urban as it was under Urban Meyer, but I think that's just a natural football thing where you have to show that you can be trusted before they're going to put you in a position to hurt the team in a great way, because you can hurt them a lot easier on offense or defense than you can on special teams if you're just one guy in a lane or something like that. So I don't see that changing much.
No, I don't. I think the answer to pretty much all of the how much is this going to change under Ryan Day is not very much, because he has spent the last couple of years coaching under Urban Meyer. And the reason they brought him in, one of the reasons, is because things were going pretty well under Urban Meyer. So they don't want to change things. So I think they're probably going to do what they can to not change things. I think Ryan Day is probably coming in as a first-time head coach. There's a whole lot of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it on this team. So special teams has been working pretty well. And the emphasis and the fact that guys take like real legitimate pride in being good at special teams and being contributors on special teams, and that's not like oh yeah, and that too. Like that is an actual point of focus on the team. So the fact that guys take pride in it and the fact that they get the results that they do, I don't see any reason at all why they would change any of that at all.
There's no reason to change right now either, because you still have all of the same kicking specialists. You've got Blake Hobbiel back at place kicker doing your kickoffs. You've got Drew Crispin back doing his crazy spinning punts, stopping dead without even bouncing, Tom. They just land flat like a pillow, just right on the one. So you've got those guys back. Why change? Because it did work, and which takes us to the question that you're going to read now, and where maybe some people think it didn't.
Yeah, next one from Purgatory Buck. Will Ohio State still try to angle the kick to land around the 1 or 2 yard line, even with the fair catch rule? I don't think there's any reason for them to try not to do it. They didn't. It was not something they really got burned on last year. I'm trying to think of how many long kickoff returns did they give up. They had the one against TCU where Kevontae Turpin was lying in the end zone, and that got called back for a penalty. I'm not remembering any other ones. I'm remembering a whole bunch of nightmarish kickoff returns, but those were all 2017, I think, not 18. So, and if people end up just fair catching it more, then that's fine. They're going to fair catch it more. But I think that strategy worked out reasonably well for them in 2018. So I would expect pretty much the same until something significant changes.
Yeah, I think Blake maybe had one or two kicks out of bounds maybe later in the season, and that kind of sticks in the memory more. But I think the fair catch thing made things safer to miss a little bit more towards the middle, whereas last year when you missed towards the middle, that became a return outside of where the defense was going. So maybe that's what cut down on the returns, because there weren't really any long returns. They gave up 15 yards a return this past season. And I'm just looking over the game by game statistics. Against Maryland, they gave up 6 returns for 102 yards, which is still just a 17-yard average. So there may have been something kind of long in there, but probably not. So I think they did fine last year. No reason to change anything. And I think the fair catch rule helped them a little bit because it allowed them to miss more in the middle and not get caught with it, or not forced to pay for it. And I think they were okay allowing the teams to start at the 25 because of Urban Meyer's, the stats on the plan to win. Like if the team starts at the 25, they've got this percentage to drive down the field and score, and he likes those percentages. So I think they were happy. I think they will, like you said, there's no reason to change it. Nothing was terrible last season. I mean, we saw what got changed. Look at the coaching staff. That'll tell you where the changes were needed. And sure, you can say, yeah, but the special teams coordinator is gone. It's like, well, I mean, come on, stop busting my balls. All right. You could see what needed changed, and that's your clue. Those are your facts. And I see no reason to drastically or dramatically change anything that they did on special teams other than, sure, catch more punts. That's always a good idea. And Tom, do you think they should be more aggressive on their kickoff returns? Like in terms of like DeMario returning them, would you like to see fewer fair catches?
I would. I think that in general, teams that have better athletes should be pushing the envelope more on kick returns and trying to do more. Now, if you're catching the ball 5 yards deep in the end zone, or even 2 yards deep in the end zone, yeah, okay, take a knee. But if you're catching the ball on the 4, on the 5, like you should be running that out, because you have, in the same way that your offensive players are better than the other team's offensive players in most games, and the defensive players are better than the other team's defensive players, that also means that your special teamers are probably a little bit bigger and a little bit faster and a little bit stronger than the other team's special teamers. So you have that opportunity to make a play. And there's that angle that where Ohio State should be running it out more. And other teams, if you have, if you are Florida Atlantic this year or a Cincinnati this year, and you have a kick returner who is a game-breaking kick returner, you should be giving it a shot because, YOLO, what do you have to lose? Like you are going to have to make plays, and the Ohio State defense cannot possibly be the 90-yard bucket of fire that it was all of 2018. It can't possibly be that bad again. So you're going to have to probably make plays in other phases of the game, and shoot your shot. Take your take the puncher's chance, whatever sports metaphor you want to use. Like if you have a guy who has the opportunity to make that play, give him that chance. Give him the opportunity to make that play. Take a shot, see what happens.
For Ohio State, in the same way that they're okay with just a punt returner simply catching the ball because they feel good about going 75 yards on any given day or any given drive, I think that same attitude should hold with the kickoff return, in that yeah, give it a shot. If you only get out to the 17, we can go 83 yards. Give it a shot. That's what we're all blocking for. We want to get the ball into the most explosive player's hands, and now you're giving us an opportunity to do that. Let's see what we can do. I think a lot of that still also comes down to how confident you are in, or how not confident, but if you're productive, then yeah, you're going to say 90% of the time, return it when you catch it at the 5 or the 9 or whatever. If it's a situation where early in the season you've returned six kickoffs and you have not gotten to the 20 at all, then okay, maybe just start fair catching it, because for whatever reason you're not blocking it well, you're not reading the blocks well, you're not running it well. The answer isn't there, and so until you figure out the answer, just start fair catching, and maybe that's the way they'll go.
We have one more special teams themed question from @AnimVandahar. Could you see the current kickoff/return following scores be replaced with a 4th and 15 type punting situation in the next 10 years? That was a Greg Schiano idea when he was at Rutgers.
It's got to be like 4th and 25 at least. A situation where you score and then you're kicking off from the 30, and I say kicking off in quotes, where you would then be faced with like a 4th and 20, 25. And if you get it, then you keep the ball. If you don't get it, then they get the ball where it dies. I think for me, 4th and 15 is not nearly difficult enough, even though it's costly if you don't get it. I don't know, Tom. Do you think more teams is 4th and 15 far enough away to discourage it 95% of the time?
It's 15 is actually probably about right. I'm looking at I got this came in late enough that I didn't have a chance to do the research. I'm just frantically Googling the probability of converting 4th down in the college game, and the table that I see right now is just up to 4th and 10, which your probability of converting is like 28% on 4th and 10. So usually the rule of thumb on recovering onside kicks is like 10%. So you'd probably want it to end up somewhere around 10%. So
is it that high still?
I think it was somewhere around there. I mean, I haven't looked that up in a while, but it was, it's somewhere in that neighborhood. It's not like 2% and it's not like 50%. So it's somewhere around 10. So if you figure, I mean, it looks like this is a pretty linear drop, 34% for 7, 32% for 8, 30% for 9, 28% for 10. So to get it down to 10%, yeah, it would be about something like a 4th and 20 or so. 4th and 18, 4th and 20, something in that area. So I personally would think that might really make the game. It might be a very exciting change to the game.
Oh, it would definitely be a very exciting change.
I don't know how much. I mean, if they're doing this is a player safety issue, because kickoffs are a disproportionately dangerous play. Like a disproportionate number of severe injuries happen on kickoffs as opposed to just a normal offense or defensive snap. So that's why they would be going to this, and that's why they've done the fair catch thing. I do think kickoffs are going to go away at some point, and I don't know if that's just going to be, now you get it on the 25-yard line and that's it. And then,
I don't like that.
If you want to onside kick it, you do it this way or something like that. I would love to see this in some form at some point, and I think you're going to see kickoffs change at some point. I don't know if 10 years is the horizon. I think major changes. I mean, and this would be a fantastic off-season show that we should probably do. I mean, major changes are coming at some point sooner than people think to football, because you're getting, like, you have the kind of canary in the coal mine stuff with the liability insurance that youth leagues are just like folding because they can't pay the liability insurance, or the insurance carriers won't insure them. That's the kind of stuff that it's a very minor story right now. It's going to turn into a world changer probably sooner than people think. But that's a good show for us to do in May or June.
Yeah, some people are calling it the end of football, and it's because of the insurance stuff. But we talked to maybe Justin Hilliard last season, asking him about this rule, and he said he hates it because everybody else is still getting hit as hard as ever. And they think just because the returner isn't getting hit that, things have been solved. But all of these blockers are still running into each other full speed, and you get plenty of injuries there as well. So, yeah, I think kickoff is eventually going to go away. I think this is a very interesting fix. And not only is it a good fix because you're talking about just punting the ball instead. Now you've got a fair catch and you start at the 30 or whatever, but you add that whole extra almost make it, take it type of thing. And now the 28-point lead that you had is 14 points in a span of minutes. And now everybody's clinching. And yeah, so I think it makes for a more entertaining product. Now it's going to be a different product, and different isn't always welcome, but it's either different or gone completely. So yeah, I'll take different.
I'm all for something that makes it safer, something that maybe changes some of the strategy. I mean, I have a long established history of getting very annoyed at overly conservative coaches who should be onside kicking more and going for it on fourth down more and all of that. So if this can be kind of the swift kick to the butt in the to the stodgy, staid, overly conservative coaching fraternity and maybe inspire them to take more chances and do more things that they should be doing already, like, yep, sure, let's do that.
You mentioned stodgy coaches, which is a good segue to the last question I wanted to spring on you. At some point this spring, I'm going to be doing my Big Ten ratings, and I was thinking about it this week. The coaching ratings right now, Tom, the head coaching ratings in the Big Ten East, where are you putting Ryan Day? Because I'm going to have to deal with this. And
yeah, and you know what? That's fascinating because let's work from the bottom. Probably better than Chris Ash. Mike Loxley, based on the little bit of track record that we have of Ryan Day versus Mike Loxley, I'm going to say I think they've won the same number of games,
exactly.
And Mike Loxley has coached
wins.
about 30 more. So yeah, I'll put him ahead of there. Mark D'Antonio. I mean, here's another good topic. Who's the next head coach at Michigan State? Because I think that change might be coming pretty soon. Have we? I don't know. Have we had that conversation on the podcast or just
no
off air? Because I think after the shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic thing he did with his offensive coaching staff, I think this might be the last year of Mark D'Antonio because he did not take the opportunity that was given to him to. Right. Refurbish the offensive staff into something that actually resembles a competent, coherent offensive staff.
So that's another topic for the summer.
Yes. We are, in addition to programming our TV network, we're just programming our entire offseason right here, live on the podcast.
But getting back to my question.
Great content for everyone. Getting back to your question. So Indiana, yeah, I haven't been particularly impressed with Tom Allen. I put him ahead of there. So I think I'm down to just Jim Harbaugh and James Franklin. And I mean, James Franklin is a heck of a recruiter. And I guess the safe thing to do is say that he is in third place right now behind those other two, but has the opportunity to win himself up to the top of the list with one good season. Because I don't think either of those guys is a top 5 coach nationally, or maybe even a top 10 coach nationally. Like Urban Meyer was the best coach in the Big Ten East by the widest of margins.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if Ryan Day is just very good at everything, he can immediately be the number one coach in the league. But I don't know if he's there yet.
Yeah, no, the safest thing is just, you know what, avoid all of the arguing, just put him third and that way I don't have to deal with Michigan fans and the Penn State fans. And then we'll find out after the season where he really is. And maybe it's 5th, maybe it's 6th. We'll see. Breaking news right now, Ohio State is up 12-6 on Michigan. So with 14 minutes to go. So breaking.
Well, either people right now are mournfully looking back at Ohio State losing by 30 points and the hot start they had, or going, Yeah, I remember when we chanted "Just Like Football"? That was so fun.
Yeah.
So one of those things.
All right. I'm gonna go ahead. We'll go wrap this show up. Tom's got some editing to do. I've got some basketball stuff to do, and then you'll have a show. So thanks everybody for listening. Make sure to check out the rest of the stuff on the Ozone. We're writing stuff every day for you. For you. All right. Not for anybody else. For you. So remember that. Think about that. We don't care about anybody else.
It's like minus 30 degrees outside in Columbus on Wednesday. So you should be sitting inside and clicking on every article we've written for the last month if you haven't read all of them. And you should also, while you're inside, you should also be rating and reviewing us on iTunes, because that also is an important part of your duty. All this wonderful content we're providing you for free. That's what we ask you to do in return. Rate and review the podcast. I'm actually going to, when it stops looking like Hoth outside, I will go out and mail some of. We did get some nice reviews and ratings in the last week. I'm going to start mailing out some of those programs. We talked last week about Rose Bowl programs and lanyards and programs from some of the games this year. I'll start sending those out in the next few days when I feel like actually venturing outside. So you can look for those, and if you do rate and review us on iTunes, just DM me a screen capture, and I will add you into the list of people who we will be drawing for some of those wonderful prizes. So thank you to everyone who has done that already, and thank you to everyone who will do it this week because they love us so much.
That's right. All right, so thanks for listening. We will talk to you next week.
Well, she threw away the motel key. I wish it never meant nothing to me. Say well, now say well. Oh yeah. Say well, now say well. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we could steal a car and leave